Ever wonder if the world's most famous people are truly as good-hearted as they seem? In a world often focused on celebrity drama, prepare for an emotional journey as we uncover the astonishing secret acts of kindness from your favorite stars. These stories will not only surprise you but also restore your faith in humanity. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly, cutting through the morning hum of conversation and espresso steam. Ethan Blake, known to millions as the hard-driving investor from Undercover Millionaire, slipped inside wearing a gray hoodie and a baseball cap low enough to hide his face. Filming had wrapped 2 days ago, and the crew was gone, but the weight of what he'd seen still clung to him like the smell of coffee in his clothes. He wasn't there for caffeine. He just needed noise, the kind that muffled thoughts. But fate, as it turned out, wasn't done with him yet. At the back corner table sat a man with 2 children. Their clothes were clean but tired, their laughter too quiet, as though it needed permission. The father, a thin man in his 40s with kind eyes, was helping his son with a math worksheet spread between coffee cups. His daughter was drawing with a broken crayon. There was something about the man's calmness amid the struggle that caught Ethan's attention. When the waitress came by, the man hesitated before ordering just one muffin to split between the 3 of them. "We're fine, thank you," he said gently, even when the waitress offered a refill. Ethan's chest tightened. He'd seen that tone before, the quiet dignity of someone pretending scarcity was a choice. Ethan recognized him. Or rather, he felt like he should. There was a familiarity in the man's voice, the shape of his gratitude when he smiled at his children. But Ethan brushed it off, chalking it up to the exhaustion of a long shoot. Then the little boy dropped his crayon, and it rolled to Ethan's feet. As he bent to pick it up, the man met his eyes for a fraction of a second. That glance, steady, unguarded, hit Ethan with a rush of memory he couldn't place. He left the cafe before he could think about it. But outside, he couldn't stop pacing. Something about that man tugged at a thread buried deep in his past. The ache of familiarity was maddening. He finally turned back toward the glass window, watching as the father gathered his kids and left, holding their small hands like lifelines. Ethan followed at a distance. Not out of pity, but curiosity, and something more primal, something that whispered you owe him. The trio walked 4 blocks to a homeless shelter, disappearing through its narrow entrance beneath a faded sign that read Hope Haven. Ethan froze on the sidewalk. The father he'd just watched tutor his kids and share a single muffin was living in a shelter. The realization hit like cold rain. He took out his phone, staring at his reflection in the screen, billionaire, public hero, private stranger, and made a quiet vow. He didn't know their names yet. But he was going to change their lives. What Ethan didn't know was that he'd already crossed paths with this man once before, years ago, when he was the one who needed saving. By daylight, Ethan Blake was the face of triumph, a billionaire who turned a $50 loan into an empire of tech startups and real estate. Cameras loved him, magazines quoted him, and strangers recognized him on sidewalks. But away from the spotlight, he lived almost invisibly. A small rented loft downtown, no security detail, no luxury cars, just one man trying to remember what it felt like to be real. He'd learned the hard way that fame bends perception. Once, a stranger's smile meant connection. Now, it meant opportunity. Every handshake came with a pitch, every compliment with an agenda. After Undercover Millionaire, anonymity had become a luxury rarer than gold. That's why helping the shelter family in secret felt right. Behind the disguise, a thrift store jacket, trimmed beard, and tinted glasses, Ethan could move without the gravity of his own name. He could witness pain without being asked for a solution. More importantly, he could give without anyone keeping score. He'd been sending quiet help since the cafe encounter. He'd called in favors from old friends, one owned an auto shop, another managed a warehouse. Within days, the father had a temporary job interview. A week later, the family's motel bill mysteriously disappeared. Ethan told himself it wasn't charity, it was repayment for something unnamed that still burned in his chest. At night, though, the disguise slipped. Sitting alone in his loft, Ethan replayed that moment in the cafe, the look in the man's eyes, that haunting familiarity. He dug through memory like a miner searching for one forgotten gem, but the past refused to surface. He opened his laptop, scrolling through the production photos from Undercover Millionaire. Each episode had ended with a lesson about humility, about giving back, but none of them had reached him like this quiet mission. There was something pure in anonymity. No applause. No cameras. Just the sound of lives quietly shifting because someone cared. Still, one question echoed in the dark. Why him? Of all the people he'd met, why this man, this family, this tug he couldn't ignore? Ethan closed the laptop, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd go back to the shelter, not as the man on TV, but as the stranger who'd finally found a purpose worth hiding for. He had no idea that the truth about who this man really was would rewrite the story of his own success. The mornings were the hardest. Not because of hunger or cold, but because of pretending. Every sunrise, Daniel and his wife, Grace, turned their old station wagon into a home again before the kids woke up, folding blankets, hiding the empty cans, brushing away the shame that clung to the windows like fog. Their children, Emma and Caleb, were young enough to see adventure in everything. To them, sleeping in a car was camping. Daniel and Grace never corrected them. Hope, after all, was the only currency they still had. Daniel had once been a mechanic with his own small shop. Then came the accident, a fall from a customer's lift, months of recovery, and bills that grew faster than his body could heal. The insurance denied his claim, the bank took the shop, and by the time he could stand again, the world had moved on without him. Grace worked double shifts at a diner, but it wasn't enough. They'd lost their apartment, then their storage unit, then everything that made them look like everyone else. The final blow came when the motel raised its rates, and they found themselves in the parking lot, engine off, silence loud. That night, Grace whispered, "We'll make it back, Danny. God doesn't forget kindness." Daniel wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that the small, good things he'd done in life, the times he'd helped strangers, the gas money he once gave to a man stranded outside Reno, meant something. But faith was hard to hold when you couldn't even hold your own children steady through the cold. At the shelter, things weren't easier, but they were safer. Grace kept her pride tucked behind polite smiles, volunteering to clean while Caleb colored at a corner table. Emma spent hours in the small library, tracing the letters of books she couldn't check out. The world saw statistics. Ethan Blake, watching from a distance, saw something else, a family still holding each other together when everything else had fallen apart. That, more than anything, kept him coming back. He started by paying for their motel room, anonymously, of course. Then came the job lead, the grocery gift cards, the school enrollment call that Grace thought was a miracle. To them, it was as though heaven itself had opened a door. To Ethan, it was the first time in years his wealth felt like it meant something. One evening, as Daniel walked the kids back from the shelter, a gust of wind pushed an old newspaper against his leg. The headline read, "Ethan Blake, the billionaire who never forgot his roots." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Must be nice," he muttered, tossing it aside. If only he'd looked closer, at the small photograph of a younger Ethan beside an old rusted car. The same car Daniel had once stopped for on a desolate Nevada road. The past was closer than either man realized. And before long, the truth was going to find them both. The cameras had stopped rolling, but Ethan Blake couldn't shake the family from his mind. In the edited finale of Undercover Millionaire, audiences saw him shake hands with local workers, donate to a youth center, and drive away under a sunset that symbolized closure. What they didn't see was what happened next, when he circled back to Hope Haven hours after the crew packed up. He sat in his car across the street, engine off, eyes fixed on the shelter's flickering sign. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like a man of wealth. He felt like a man haunted, by the look in Daniel's eyes, by a strange familiarity he still couldn't explain. He began small. That night, he called his old assistant, using a private number. "Set up a trust," he said quietly. "Anonymous donor. Local shelter fund. Priority to families with kids." Within a week, Daniel's family received an offer for a clean motel room and vouchers from an unnamed supporter. Grace cried in disbelief. Daniel tried to refuse, pride tangled with gratitude, but the shelter staff convinced him to accept. Ethan watched from afar, relief and guilt warring inside him. He could change their situation, but not their memory of what it meant to struggle. He started appearing near places they frequented, never close enough to be noticed, but always near. He'd drop envelopes with grocery cards, call landlords pretending to be a church representative, and send a letter under a false name confirming Daniel's job interview at the auto shop. Each act filled Ethan with a quiet satisfaction, but also fear. What if they found out who he was? Would they think it was charity, or worse, pity? One evening, Ethan lingered near the shelter's courtyard as the family played under the dull glow of a street lamp. Daniel's laughter echoed softly, real and unguarded for the first time. Ethan's throat tightened. It was the sound of a man reclaiming pieces of himself. He knew he should walk away, that his job was done. But something in him refused to let go. That night, Ethan opened an old box from his early days, receipts, faded business cards, a photo from Reno, and froze. In the corner of that picture stood a man beside a station wagon, the same man he just helped. It began with a gift card, folded neatly inside a used paperback novel left on a shelter's donation table. Grace found it by chance while reading bedtime stories to her children. $50 to a local grocery store. "Someone must have dropped it," she whispered. But when the clerk scanned it the next morning, the balance was full. "Looks like it's yours, the cashier said, smiling. Grace cried the whole walk back. Ethan had watched from across the street, hat pulled low. He timed everything perfectly, leaving no trace. The idea had come to him late one night. Small miracles feel safer than grand gestures. Big checks could make people suspicious. Small blessings restored dignity. A week later, Daniel received a call from a repair shop he didn't remember applying to. "One of your old clients recommended you," the manager said. The client, of course, was Ethan, using a network of favors to open quiet doors. When Daniel showed up for his first day, a set of brand new tools waited on his workbench. No one knew where they'd come from. More help followed, tiny threads of grace woven into their days. A pair of kids' shoes delivered to the shelter by mistake. A landlord suddenly willing to overlook credit history. A school principal who miraculously found room for Emma and Caleb in a full classroom. Each act felt to the family like divine timing. To Ethan, it was purpose rediscovered. For the first time in years, he wasn't signing contracts or chasing markets. He was watching lives bloom again because of a decision he could never take credit for. Yet, anonymity had its ache. He wanted to see their smiles up close, to hear Daniel laugh again like he had that night in the courtyard. But he couldn't. Not yet. The secret was the soul of the mission. Then one evening, while checking the shelter's bulletin board, Ethan noticed a handwritten note pinned among job flyers and prayer requests. "To whoever's been watching over us, thank you. You've given us more than money. You've given us hope. If you ever want dinner, come find us. Room 12, Sunset Motel." Ethan's heart stopped. For the first time, they had reached out, and now, he had to decide whether to stay hidden or finally step into the light. At first, it felt like answered prayers. The motel bills stopped piling up, Daniel had steady hours at the auto shop, and Grace could finally buy groceries without counting every coin. But as weeks passed, small questions began to build like cracks under a painted wall. It started with the shoes. Grace knew every brand the shelter ever received, and these new pairs weren't from their usual donors. Too new. too perfect in size. Then came the strange phone call, the school principal who insisted the kids had been recommended by a close friend. Grace had never given anyone their names. Daniel brushed it off at first. Maybe the shelter staff's been helping behind the scenes, he said. Some people just care. But even he couldn't ignore the pattern. Every blessing seemed to arrive just when they were at their lowest, and always without explanation. One afternoon at work, Daniel caught sight of a man leaning against a car across the street. Gray hoodie, baseball cap. Something about his posture, calm, observing, made Daniel's instincts tighten. He turned for just a second, and the man was gone. That night, Daniel told Grace, "You ever feel like we're being watched?" She froze. "Watched how?" "Not bad," he said quickly, not wanting to scare her. "Just, maybe someone keeping tabs. Someone helping." Grace frowned. Why hide it, then? If someone wanted to help, why not just come forward? Daniel didn't have an answer. The idea of being watched gnawed at him. He'd wake in the night to check the window, half expecting a shadow by the door. But what unsettled him most wasn't fear, it was recognition. Something about that man at the curb sparked a memory he couldn't reach. Meanwhile, Ethan was unraveling too. The note on the shelter board had both warmed and frightened him. They were grateful, but they were also aware. Every day he delayed answering, the guilt thickened. Still, the risk of revealing himself felt too great. What if his presence ruined everything? What if they saw him as a rich man playing savior? One evening, he drove past the motel. Through the thin curtains, he saw them eating dinner, Grace serving, Daniel laughing with the kids. Ethan smiled, but his chest ached. He belonged outside their window, never inside their circle. Then Daniel stepped out to throw away trash, and their eyes met through the shadows. Just a flash, but enough for both men to freeze. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Wait," he whispered. Something old stirred in him, a dusty memory of a broken-down car, a young man stranded, a $20 bill handed over without hesitation. Ethan turned away, heart pounding. He knew that look. Recognition. Daniel ran toward the street, but the stranger was gone. And for the first time, he realized their guardian angel might not be a stranger at all. For a while, everything seemed to hold steady. Daniel's job, the kids' school, the small but growing sense of normalcy. Then, without warning, it all began to unravel. The auto shop shut down unexpectedly. The owner, caught in legal trouble, closed the business overnight. Daniel arrived one morning to locked gates and a note taped to the door, temporarily closed. His heart sank. The paychecks had barely covered their expenses. Without them, the fragile new life they'd built would collapse like a house of cards. Grace tried to stay calm. "We've been through worse," she whispered, but her eyes betrayed the fear she tried to hide. The kids could sense it too. Emma grew quiet, and Caleb stopped asking for bedtime stories. Ethan watched from his car, parked just far enough to be unseen. He'd promised himself he wouldn't interfere too much, that the family needed to find their own footing. But seeing Daniel pacing outside the shuttered shop tore at him. This wasn't bad luck, it was a test of faith, for both of them. That night, Ethan sat alone in his loft, staring at the photo from Reno, the same one that had haunted him since he found it. Daniel's face was clearer now in his memory. The man who'd once handed him $20 and a smile, saying, "You'll make it. Just don't forget to help someone when you do." He'd been searching for that man for years. And now, he was right here, broken again. Ethan picked up his phone and called his financial advisor. "There's a garage on 5th that's about to go up for auction," he said. "Buy it. Quietly. I'll send someone to run it." But anonymity came with consequences. Helping from the shadows meant no explanations. When Daniel was offered a new mechanic job the very next day, at that same garage, he hesitated. "This feels too good to be true," he told Grace. "Someone's pulling strings again." Grace grabbed his hand. Does it matter? Maybe this is how grace works. Ethan stood outside later that night, watching the light flicker inside the reopened shop. He'd crossed the line, stepped from witness to orchestrator. Just as he turned to leave, a voice came from behind him. "Why are you helping us?" Daniel stood in the doorway, eyes wide with realization. Ethan froze. The sound of Daniel's voice behind him sliced through the quiet night like a blade. Slowly, he turned. The glow from the garage lights cast long shadows across the pavement, and for a moment neither man spoke, two lives connected by years of silence. Daniel's jaw was tight, his hands trembling slightly. "It's you, isn't it?" he said. "The man from the cafe, the one who's been watching us." Ethan's throat felt dry. "Daniel, You've been paying for everything. The motel, the school, the job, why?" Ethan looked down, the disguise gone, exhaustion written across his face. "Because you helped me once," he said softly. "Years ago, outside Reno. My car had broken down. You gave me $20 when I had nothing. I told you I'd pay it forward someday. I just didn't know it would be you I'd find again." Daniel's eyes widened as the memory crashed back, dusty roads, a stranded stranger, and his wife laughing as she handed him the 20 from her purse. "That was you?" Ethan nodded, emotion trembling in his voice. "You told me not to forget where I came from. I never did. Every success I've had started with that moment." Grace stepped forward, tears streaking her cheeks. "All this time, why didn't you just tell us?" "Because I wanted to help, not take away your dignity," Ethan said. "The cameras left, the show ended, but I couldn't walk away from what I saw. You reminded me of who I used to be." Daniel's shoulders dropped. For the first time in years, he was speechless, not from despair, but disbelief. "We thought you were some kind of angel," he said with a shaky laugh. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe we both were, for each other." The two men stood in silence, the weight of years lifting between them. Grace joined Daniel, placing a hand on his arm. "You gave us back our hope," she said. "You have no idea what that means." Ethan's eyes shimmered. "No," he replied, voice breaking. "You gave me back my heart." Before Daniel could respond, a car pulled up, headlights cutting through the moment. A reporter stepped out, camera ready. The secret Ethan had guarded so carefully was about to be exposed to the world. The flash of the reporter's camera had turned that quiet night into chaos. Within hours, headlines blazed across social media. "Undercover Millionaire secretly helps homeless family, a real-life miracle." Ethan hated the noise. He hadn't wanted fame for this. But what the world saw as a story of generosity, he saw as a promise fulfilled, a circle finally closed. In the days that followed, Ethan made one thing clear: he didn't want to hand them a check and walk away. He wanted partnership, not pity. Together, he and Daniel rebuilt the small garage under a new name, Full Circle Auto Care. Daniel managed the floor, Grace handled the books, and Ethan stayed in the background, investing quietly while letting Daniel lead. The work became therapy. Every wrench turn, every customer served reminded Daniel of the man he used to be. The community, inspired by the viral story, flooded in with support, dropping off food, donating tools, offering free publicity. For the first time, Daniel felt seen not as a charity case, but as a man of worth again. Meanwhile, Ethan found peace in the simplest things: Grace's laughter echoing through the shop, the kids racing around the parking lot, Daniel's steady voice guiding the apprentices he'd begun training. It was the life Ethan had chased for years through cameras and contracts, only to find it in a grease-stained garage with people who had nothing to prove. But fame has a way of complicating even the purest intentions. One morning, Grace came across a letter addressed to Ethan at the shop. The return address read, Blake Enterprises, Legal Affairs. Her stomach dropped as she read the first line. Your charitable involvement with the family in question may constitute a breach of your post-show confidentiality clause. By the time Ethan arrived, Daniel had already seen it. "They're threatening you?" he asked, voice tight with anger. Ethan nodded slowly. "They own the show. If they decide to make this a scandal, they can take everything." Daniel's fists clenched. "After all you've done, they can't just erase that." Ethan smiled faintly. "They can take my money, Daniel. But not what we built here." As they spoke, another envelope slid under the garage door, this one stamped with the logo of Blake Enterprises News Division. The headline draft inside read, "The lie behind the redemption, did the millionaire stage it all?" The scandal never came. The media frenzy burned bright for a week, then faded into the next news cycle. What remained wasn't gossip, it was gratitude. Across the country, people began sharing their own stories: a stranger's meal paid for, rent covered anonymously, job opportunities created quietly. Hashtags like #FullCircleKindness began trending, and the little garage that started it all became a symbol of hope. Ethan stood outside Full Circle Auto Care one crisp morning, watching as Daniel showed a teenager how to change a tire. Grace handed out free coffee to waiting customers. Emma and Caleb were now in school full-time, running in and out of the shop after classes, their laughter echoing like a hymn of renewal. For Ethan, the noise of the world had finally quieted. Wealth, he realized, had always been about ownership. Purpose was about belonging. What he'd built here wasn't an empire, it was a ripple. And that ripple had become a tide. He started a foundation in secret. No press releases, no televised events, funding small community repair shops that hired single parents, veterans, and people rebuilding their lives. Daniel was the first mentor in the program, teaching not just trade skills but dignity. "We don't fix cars," he told new hires. "We fix confidence." One afternoon, Ethan sat with Daniel outside the shop, sipping black coffee from paper cups. The sun dipped low, painting the lot in gold. "You could have had your name on every building in this city," Daniel said quietly. "Instead, you chose this." Ethan smiled. "Names fade. Stories last. You reminded me of that." Grace stepped out, waving an envelope. "Mail for you, Mr. Blake," she teased. Inside was a letter from a small town halfway across the country, a man describing how he'd helped a family using the Full Circle story as inspiration. At the bottom, he'd written, "Because someone once helped me when I was stranded." Ethan's eyes filled. "It's happening again," he whispered. "The kindness keeps moving." Daniel nodded. "That's the point, isn't it? Not to be remembered, but to keep remembering others." Ethan looked out at the horizon, a quiet smile tracing his face. He'd spent a lifetime chasing success. Now, watching a family rebuild what money could never buy, Ethan finally understood. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in hearts forever changed.